Hey guys, Hugo Leveille here. Welcome to my new training series on FX PhD called From Newbie to TD. So in this training series, we're going to learn various tricks that will help you to build a VFX pipeline or tools for your VFX pipeline. So we'll be seeing tricks starting from beginner level to more advanced stuff. So in this first training series, we're going to see three things. So the first thing we're going to see is how to manage your Python module using pip, and also how to make virtual environments so that you can, depending on the Python version you're using, you can make customization for your Python installation, also depending on the software that you're going to use in your pipeline. So that's the first thing we'll see. Then we'll jump in MongoDB with Mongo Engine, which is a database system that we can use that we'll be using to build all our tool in the upcoming video. So we'll be seeing how to interact with this database and also see the Mongo Engine module, that is the Python module that we'll be using to talk with MongoDB. And lastly, in this first series, we'll see how we can manage your code and track it with Mercurial, which is a tracking system for your code so that you can track all the change you make in your pipeline code and also use it to collaborate with other people that will be making stuff in your code as well. And we'll also see how to use the Python API of Mercurial to really specify what code every artist should be using depending on the software or the project they're working on. So to simulate that we have multiple computers with different artists in our pipeline, what I've done is made some virtual machine that will act as different computer. So for instance, here I have one Mac that will act as a computer with a user. And here I have a virtual Windows machine that we have another user log in this computer. So depending on the training, we'll see a different configuration. But for instance, in this first training, I'll have one TD computer where we'll be generating all the code and pushing it to the other user. So then I'll have another Windows machine that will be more like an artist computer working in Nuke. And here on this Mac, that's where I will host the database of MongoDB, for instance, and also will host the Mercurial repo. So we'll be using virtual machine just to make sure that we have different computer that we can connect in this video. So this will help us to simulate kind of a small studio with different users. So first, let's see how we can install multiple versions of Python on the same system and how we can manage them as well as their install module using pip, and how we can create virtual environment with the virtual env module. Okay, so let's start by installing Python on the system. So what we'll do is we'll install two versions of Python. So we'll take the latest version that currently available, which is 3.8. But we'll also download and install Python 2.7, which is the current version used in most of the VFX software as we speak right now. So we'll download those two Python, and then this will give us the opportunity to see how we can use the virtual environment of Python to make some control version of Python depending on the software you'll be using. So for instance, if you want to make some code that you know will require Python 2.7, you can make a virtual environment that will have its own set of package installed in it so that you know exactly everything that is required for a specific project. Then if you're making another project that require Python 3.8, you can make another virtual environment that will have its own set of package installed inside of it. So first, let's download Python. So we'll just type Python here, and we'll go on the official Python website where we can select the desired version that you want. So we'll just go in download. So right here, we can download the latest version. So this one is 3.8. And if you go in all releases, you'll have access to previous Python version. So make sure to download Python 2.7. Like I said, it's the one currently used in most of the VFX software. And here you can download the installer for your system. So I've already downloaded those 2 files. So I'll just open my file browser and go in my download. So let's start by installing Python 3.8. So just double click on that. And the only thing I'm going to change from the installation is the path where we'll be installing the Python 3.8. So by default, it wants to put it in this path. So just to make it a bit easier, I'll put it at the root of my C drive. And the important thing here that you have is the Python path that you can add. So right now, I will make sure to not check this for Python 3.8 because the one we're going to use is 2.7. So after I've installed 2.7, I'll show you exactly what this checkbox is doing. So right now we'll just make sure to not check Python 3.8 and we'll just customize the installation path. So instead I'll just browse for a new folder. I'll go at the root of my C drive, make a new folder. We'll call this one Python 3.8. and click OK, and we'll install it. Python 3.8 has just finished its install. So if we close this, so let's test if everything has installed correctly. So we'll just start a new command prompt. Double click here. So now if we try to launch Python, we'll just type Python, and you'll see that we have a problem in that the file system is not finding our Python interpreter. Instead, it's searching for it inside the App Store of Microsoft, which is not something we want to happen. And that's because we haven't specified when we install Python 3.8, we didn't check the variable installation for Python. So now we have to, if we want to be able to type Python from anywhere in the file system, we need to edit the system variable so that it can find the interpreter. So to do that, we'll just go here and type env to be able to edit the system environment. So we'll just double click here. And then you would add to click on environment variable. And in this path variable, you want to add your Python path. We'll just double click here and we'll make a new, and we'll just browse for our path. So we'll go on our C drive, find our Python 3.8 folder, click OK, and click OK everywhere. So now if we start a new command prompt, and from any folder we type Python, you see that we're currently able to launch Python 3.8. So make sure, if you want to be able to launch Python from anywhere in the system, to either specify the add path and at the installation stage, or then add it to your file system after the installation. So now let's install Python 2.7, which is the one we're going to use. So we'll just double click here. I will install for all user. Next. And in this case, you would have to add the Python to your path. So let's do it here. So we install this, click on next. This will install Python 2.7. There it is. So we click on finish. So now if we go on our C drive, we have our 2 Python version. So now if we open a prompt once again and type Python, you see now that it's finding Python 2.7. And if we just close this and go back in our system variable, click here, we'll go back here, double click on the path, and you see that it's launching Python 2.7 because that's the path it finds first in this list. So let's say that you want to be able to launch Python, still to be able to launch Python 3.8 by default when you type Python. You would add to lower this in the list. I will take this and move it down the list, this one as well. And now since Python 3.8 is on top, when we'll type Python, it should launch Python 3.8. So we'll just click on OK, OK, start a new prompt. And now if we just type Python, we see that we're in Python 3.8. So since we're going to use Python 2.7 for pretty much everything, I'll just remove this from the path. Just make sure we have no conflict. So just double click here and I'll remove Python 3.8. So delete this and click on OK. Okay, so now that we have installed Python 2.7 correctly, let's see how we can install third-party module inside our Python interpreter, and also how we can make virtual environment so that we can have control version of Python with different package installed in each of them. So to install package in Python, we'll be using the pip script that will allow us to download and install Python packages inside our Python interpreter. So to use the pip script, basically you just type pip from anywhere in your file system, and if you have set your system variable correctly, you should be able to launch the pip script. So now to install something using pip, the syntax is quite simple. It's pip install and then the name of the Python module you want to install. So let's say that I want to install pymongo, the pymongo module that will allow us to talk with MongoDB later in this training. So you would type pip install and then the name of the module, so pymongo, and click on that. So now it's downloading and installing pymongo. So now if we open our file browser, go inside our C drive, inside the Python 2.7, in the lib folder, and inside the site packages where everything is installed, you'll see that now we have pymongo that has been installed. So now let's say we want to uninstall it. So it's just pip uninstall pymongo. And we'll just confirm that we want to uninstall it. And now we see that if we go here, pymongo has been uninstalled from this Python folder. But now you see that everything is installed directly inside our Python 2.7 interpreter. But when you'll be making some tool for a specific task, you want to have control interpreter for each of your projects. So let's say you're working on a pipeline inside of Nuke, you want to make sure you're using Python 2.7 because that's the same Python that Nuke is using. But you also want to make sure that you're just using the default package that you want to use in Nuke. So let's say that for a very specific project, you want to be using pymongo and maybe also, let's say, pyqt4. So you would install those packages using pip in a separate and control Python environment that would be needing just for that you would be using just for this project. So to make a separated environment of your Python, you need to install virtual env that will allow you to create Python environment with a very specific Python interpreter and only the module that you want to install inside this virtual environment. So how do we make a virtual environment? So first we have to install using pip the virtual env module. So we'll do pip install virtual env like that. So this will download the virtual env module and install it directly inside our Python interpreter. So now how can we create a separate environment that will not take what is currently installed in our Python 2.7 folder, but in a very separated and controlled environment? So to do that, I'll just go back here at the root of my C drive. So to create a new virtual environment, basically you call the virtual env package we just installed. So virtual env. So we just press that. You see that we have the script running, but we need to specify some attribute. So to make a new variable, a new control variable environment, you will use virtual env, and then the path where you want to create this environment. So let's say I want to create a test environment on my C drive. So you would call virtual env, and then the path to your virtual env. So C, let's call it a test folder. So this. So you see this created a test folder here, and right now it's creating the virtual environment. So now if we go in this folder, we see that we have our Python folder created here. So inside here, we have some script that will be executing to activate this virtual environment. And we also see that if we go here, we have our Python interpreter installed here as well. So how do we specify that we want to use this virtual environment instead of the default Python 2.7? So to activate a virtual environment, we just go at the root of the C drive. So to activate our test environment, we'll go in the folder. So test, and inside this folder, we have a script folder, and there is the activate bat file that we need to call that will activate this virtual environment. So go here, go in the script folder, and then we'll activate the virtual environment. So now if I click this, you see that now my prompt is telling me that I'm using the test virtual environment. So now if I type Python, that's currently the Python found inside this virtual env. So just to show you the difference, I'll just exit that. And then once I'm inside this virtual environment, I can start to install some package. So let's say I want to install Mongo engine. So pip install Mongo engine here. So this will download and install Mongo engine inside our virtual env. So now if I start Python and try to import Mongo engine, so import Mongo engine. So the import statement worked. So now just to show you, I'll exit this Python interpreter. Then I'll deactivate the virtual env. So you only need to call the deactivate bat file. So deactivate.bat, like that. So now you see that we're outside the virtual env. And now if I type Python and try to import Mongo engine, you see that we're not finding this Mongo engine module because it has only been installed in our control virtual environment. Okay, so right now we've been making the virtual environment using the default Python specify in your variable path of your system. But let's say now that I want to make two different virtual environment, but with two different Python interpreters. So let's say I want to make a web environment where I'll be making some web development using a specific module using Python 3.8, and I want then to make a virtual env for some VFX work where maybe I will make use some module compatible with Nuke, so it should be using Python 2.7, and let's say I want to make some PySide development as well in this one. So each of those virtual env would use a different Python interpreter as well as different Python module. So let's see how we can specify that. So we'll just go at the root of my drive. So first, let's make a virtual env for Python 3.8 that will be for web development. So I'll call the virtual env. And then you need to specify which Python interpreter to use. So to do that, we'll use the flag --python equal, and then we need to specify the path to our Python 3.8 interpreter. So Python equal C, like that, inside the Python 3.8, and then we specify the executable of Python, and then we specify where we want this virtual env to be. So we'll put it next to it in the C drive, and let's call this one web. So let's run this. So now it should be creating the virtual env in our web folder here. So just to make sure we're using Python 3.8, we'll just activate this virtual env. So we'll go in web, the script folder, and call the activate bat file, like that. So now if we run Python, we see that we're in Python 3.8. So now let's install some module just for this virtual env. So let's say I want to make some websites. So maybe we want to use pymongo as the backend to store some file. So let's call pip install pymongo. Oops. Pip install. Actually, I'm inside the Python interpreter, so we just need to exit that. And then with this activated, we call pip install pymongo. Mongo. Run this. So now this should be installing pymongo in this virtual env. Now let's say we want to use Flask to make some web development. So pip install Flask. Then it's downloading this as well. So now we could try to import those two modules. So we'll start Python here, and let's import pymongo and Flask. That. And everything is working. So now we'll exit this, we'll deactivate this virtual env, so deactivate that. So now let's make the one for Python 2.7 for our VFX development. So virtual env. And then since we'll be using the Python interpreter that is set in our system variable, we don't actually need to pass our Python 2.7 path, but just for the sake of this example, let's do it. So Python equal, and we'll pass this time the folder to our Python 2.7 interpreter, like that. And let's call this one VFX. So VFX. Oop. Small typo here. So virtual env. There it is. So now back to the C drive, we have this other virtual env. So let's activate this one. So VFX scripts and activate that. So let's install, let's say, Mongo engine. So pip install Mongo engine. And let's also say that we want to do some UI inside Nuke. So we want to use PySide. So pip install PySide. So this is going to install all the package required for PySide. There it is. So now if you want to see all the module that you have installed in this virtual env, you can use pip list, and this will list you what you have installed in this virtual env. So we see that we have pymongo installed, we have installed Mongo engine, we have PySide, and you also see that since we've installed Mongo engine, this module actually requires pymongo. So by using the pip, it will also make sure to download every requirement if there is with a specific module. So that's another benefit of using pip to install all your Python package. So now I can deactivate this one. And if we just activate our web one. So this one here, and do a quick pip this. You see that we have a different set of module installed. So you see that Flask also installed Jinja 2 and other module that it required to run. So now that we have our two virtual env created, let's see how we can set up those interpreter in our Python editor. Okay, so I've just opened PyCharm, which is the Python editor I'll be using in this training series. So if you haven't played with PyCharm before, it's a free Python editor that you can use. And that is really powerful with a lot of features. So if you want to get more information on this Python editor, I would suggest you to check my training series on FXPhD called PySide for Nuke, where I spend most of the time inside PyCharm, and especially the first video of the training series where I explain a lot of tools that we can use with PyCharm. But for now, let's just configure our Python interpreter in PyCharm. So right now, if we go on File and Settings, we see that we don't have any interpreter. So let's configure PyCharm so that it can use our virtual environment. So here we can click on Add to add a new virtual env. So you can make a new virtual environment or select an existing one. So we'll just browse and we'll go select the one we've created on our C drive. So just expand that. So let's start with the VFX one. So we'll just double click here. And if we go inside scripts, that's where you will find the Python interpreter. So we'll select this, click OK. We'll make this available to all the project. We'll click on OK. So now PyCharm will scan the Python interpreter to find all the dependencies that it is using. So we see that it finds pymongo that we've added. We also see Mongo engine as well as PySide. So now we can click on apply and click OK. So now we've set our VFX virtual env. So let's do this. Let's do the same one for our Python 3.8. So we'll go in Python again, file settings, project interpreter. So now we see we have our VFX added, but let's add our web. So add existing, we'll browse once again. Expand this, go inside our web scripts, and we'll select the Python interpreter inside this folder. So just find it here, click OK, make it available to all our project, click OK. So this is going to scan all the module that we've installed inside this. So we see that this time we have Flask, Jinja, and all the dependency that was installed inside this virtual env. So we'll click on apply once again. Okay, so I just paused this training for a few minutes just to make sure that PyCharm could finish to scan all the libraries inside those virtual env. So let's make a quick test file. So I'll just right click here, make a new Python file, call this one testing. So now let's just do a quick run of this empty file. So we see that we're using the Python interpreter from our web virtual env. So now, since we've added Flask in this virtual env, we can import Flask. We've also added pymongo, so we could also import pymongo, like that. So now we could do a quick print, let's say print 10. And since we're using Python 3, this should throw an error because we need to put the print statement between parentheses. So we'll just run this. So sure enough, we're in Python 3. So now let's switch our virtual env inside PyCharm now. So we'll just go here in settings. And now we'll just change the interpreter to our VFX virtual env. Click apply and click OK. So now PyCharm is scanning this new virtual env. So we'll just give it a few seconds to complete that. And there it is. So now if we try to run this, we should have an error, because if we just run this, Flask is not a module that we have installed inside this virtual env. So we'll just delete that. But now we could still import pymongo because it was installed with Mongo engine. So we could also import Mongo engine as well. And now if we just run this, we have an import error. So a small typo, so Mongo engine, like that. There it is. And since now we're back in Python 2.7, our print statement can be done this way. So I hope you see the possibility and flexibility that using virtual env will give you. It will make sure that you have a really controlled environment for depending of your project, and that you're using the good library based on your Python interpreter.